So, hello and a very warm welcome to all of you to this discussion, which has been organized by the Asian Development Bank's Independent Evaluation Department, titled Let's Not Lock Down the SDGs. And as is apparent from the title, we will be discussing the 15-year-old global effort to improve lives of people through achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Which, mind you, was already off track by the end of 2019. And now, in a short span of time, the COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed an unprecedented crisis, causing further disruption to the SDG progress. So, of course, today's discussion will be around the role of NDBs in this context and how we can get these SDGs back on track. And we will see it through the prism of evaluators and evaluations. Evaluations can play a role in ensuring that while NDBs respond to the COVID-19 crisis, SDGs are not forgotten. And the discussion is also in the backdrop of a recent evaluation that was held by the Independent Evaluation Department, and which found that the country demands for SDG-related support in Asia and the Pacific is weak, as governments frame development issues based on their national priorities rather than the SDGs. As evaluators, we have an important role to play in keeping focus on progress, ensuring that real-time feedback is provided on what worked and what doesn't. And so that was a bit of a background about the discussion that we're going to have today. And I'd like to also mention that IED is holding this virtual event to support the gLOCAL Evaluation Week, an M&E knowledge sharing initiative convened by the CLEAR Centers. And IED has held events every year since its inception in 2019. And this year, we're also one of the sponsors. So to know a little bit more about what gLOCAL Evaluation Week is, we'd like to hear DG Marvin Taylor-Dortman, DG of IED, speak a bit more on gLOCAL Evaluation Week.
gLOCAL Evaluation Week. This is a platform that has been created by CLEAR with the purpose of bridging the gap of knowledge between the local context and the international context. As we know, our evaluation work does not end when we complete a good and solid piece of work. We need to disseminate it. We need to discuss it. We need to take the knowledge to those who need it so that our work can have the expected impact. And so we trust that during this week, we will be able to discuss, exchange, learn from the work that has been done at the local level and work that has been done with an international perspective to hone in our capacities, our skills as evaluators. Let's take advantage of this unique opportunity, so needed, especially at this time of the global pandemic.
Right, so let's start the discussion, but before that, a couple of reminders. So I will announce the name of the panelists and the moderator. As I announce your names, please turn on your videos. Also, we will be running this in 3 sessions, actually. There'll be session 1 where there'll be question and answers. In the second session, we will open the discussion to audiences. Please be ready with your questions. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, we have a fantastic panel of specialists. So you'll be especially interested in knowing what they have to say. They're subject experts. They have a very clear perspective on the topic. So please prepare your questions and ask them in a question and answer chat box that you will see at the bottom there. And we have a hashtag for the gLOCAL Evaluation Week. We've put that in the chat box as well. So if you're putting it on social media, don't forget to use the hashtag. And let me then quickly introduce you to all the panelists. We have with us today Karen Murray. She's the alternate Executive Director, Board of Directors, Asian Development Bank. Naheed Sarabi, she's the Assistant Resident Representative Prosperity at UNDP Afghanistan. And interestingly, Naheed was formerly Deputy Minister for Policy, Ministry of Finance in Afghanistan. She joins us from Kabul. We have Neeta Pokhrel. Neeta is from ADB, and she's the Chief of Water Sector Group at SDCC. Hyun is Principal Evaluation Specialist at IED. And today's session is going to be moderated by Joanne Asquith. Joanne is the Director of Thematic and Country Division at IED. So Joanne, this exciting panel is over to you, and we look forward to a very productive discussion.
Thank you very much, Saliha, and thank you for that introduction. It is very exciting today to have an all-female panel, and I'm really looking forward to a very rich and warm discussion. But let me say hello and welcome to everyone. I am Joanne Asquith. I am the Director of the Independent Evaluation Department's Country and Thematic Division in the Asian Development Bank. And I just want to say a very warm welcome to you all. Let's not lock down the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. I'm wondering what that means. I'm sure all of you are. And I'm looking forward to a discussion with this wonderful female panel. So what are the prospects for achieving the SDGs, which by all accounts, as Saliha just said, are already off track, and were already off track in 2019. And now even more so with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as we all know, is pushing millions of people back into poverty or even deeper into it. So I'm going to explore this topic with the panel. I'd like to say welcome to the panel. Let's start with the first round of questions. I'm going to ask a question to each panelist, and then I'm going to open the floor for the first round of questions. You can type your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find somewhere on the screen. But it would be really nice if you could also introduce yourself and present your question. We will then open for a second round of panel discussion before going back to the floor for a final round of questions before wrapping up. So let's get straight to it. So Hyun is a principal evaluation specialist in the Independent Evaluation Department. And this year, Hyun, you were the author of a chapter in the annual evaluation review that looked at ADB's and other multilateral development banks' institutional preparedness for achieving the SDGs. I'm wondering what that means. What does institutional preparedness mean? And well, what did the evaluation find, Hyun?
Thanks, Joanne. As articulated by Joanne earlier, pandemic's unprecedented impact on the economies and health systems is likely to deteriorate already sluggish progress toward achieving SDGs. Despite the bleak outlook on the SDGs, they still remain the best framework as of today for promoting economic recovery from the pandemic and towards resilience and sustainability. But I think the pandemic provides opportune time for development partners like ADB to revisit their institutional approaches to promoting SDGs. That said, let me just share a few, just a couple of findings of our evaluation with the focus on institutional and country levels. So first, at the institutional level, we found that ADB's institutional tools and approaches are adequate in aligning to the SDGs. Our evaluation found that ADB is among the very few MDBs to have adopted a methodical approach by mapping each indicator of its corporate results framework to the relevant SDG. We also found that ADB is indeed a pioneer in piloting SDG project classification system. But ADB's institutional alignment has yet to be fully operationalized at the country or project levels. Our evaluation found that SDG project classification system is not usually discussed at in their project documents, and also country partnership strategies rarely mention SDGs. So ADB's internal alignment should put more efforts on identifying pathways for SDG achievement. I think there is perception within ADB, not only in ADB, but in MDBs, that all operations contribute to SDGs one way or another. But as our evaluation emphasizes, the trade-offs or synergies, if you like, between SDG targets require holistic approach to development, which is very objective of SDGs. So this multifaceted holistic approach allows different sectors to assess in advance the trade-offs or synergies likely to be encountered in implementing development projects on the ground. So understanding these trade-offs or synergies will be useful, especially as ADB has been increasingly moving towards multi-sector approach to its support for member countries in the region. And at the country level, we found that many ADB member countries have varying levels of SDG ownership. Some countries have incorporated SDGs into their national development plans. But even so, this is not a guarantee that line ministries or government agencies that are designing, implementing, and monitoring public policies or programs are aware of the SDGs. Whether SDGs are embraced in practice on the ground or used merely as an appendix in national development plans varies from one country to another, we found. For instance, in Indonesia, they have Ministry of National Development Planning called Bappenas, as some of you may know. Bappenas is the lead agency for SDGs and houses National SDG Secretariat. That's what we found during our consultation meetings with the government. So Bappenas has developed roadmaps for SDG achievement and serves as SDG financing hub that coordinates various financing resources from the national budget, private sector, and nonprofit entities for SDG projects. So our evaluation found that having SDG national champions within countries paves the way for establishing structures and processes that provide guidance to line ministries and government agencies on how to integrate SDGs into planning and budgeting procedures. I'll stop here.
Hyun, thank you very much. So from what I've heard, it sounds like ADB has made a really good start, but still faces some challenges on the ground and also challenges in terms of integrating the SDGs into strategy and project design. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the role of partnerships, particularly with other organizations and multilateral development banks in particularly.
Yeah, that's a very important question because ADB cannot do everything. So MDBs and even UN agencies need to collaborate when it comes to ADB SDG support and achievement. So on partnerships, we found that the roles of MDBs and UN agencies on SDG implementation appears to be rather compartmentalized by financing on one hand, which is led by IFIs, and technical advice on the other, which is led by UN agencies. But nevertheless, we found ADB has partnered with UN agencies like UNDP, UNSK in knowledge and capacity building on the SDGs. ADB has also initiated work in mobilizing public and private financing for the SDGs, and also strengthening data collection systems of its member countries. So overall, our report points out that ADB's partnerships with the UN agencies and other MDBs have helped promote knowledge and innovation for SDG achievement, but partnerships need to be further strengthened when it comes to closing gaps in SDG financing and data collection that have been widened due to the current COVID-19 pandemic.
Hyun, thank you very much indeed. And I should add that IED is planning to do an evaluation of SDGs every 5 years leading up to the year 2030, so that when we get to 2030, we have a body of evaluation knowledge that's already built up. So this particular evaluation looked at institutional preparedness. The next one will look more closely at operations, and then the final one in 2030 will look more at results. So I think it's really important that we have that evaluation program in line with the rollout of support to SDGs. So let me turn to our next panelist, Neeta. Neeta, it's so good to see you. I feel like I haven't seen you in such a long time, such as we are in the situation of working from home. Neeta is ADB's Chief Advisor on Water and Sanitation. And Neeta, I see you as a person who's had many years of experience in the field, on the ground, in water and sanitation, in Asia and the Pacific and elsewhere in the world. And it's a privilege to be able to draw on that deep experience. So my question is that we all know that frequent and thorough hand washing can help and does help reduce the spread of COVID-19 and other infections, almost Victorian infections that still lead to the deaths of very young children and babies. Yet a quarter of the world's population lacks access to reliable water supply, and we are a long way from meeting the aspirations of SDG 6. So Neeta, are we going to meet the SDG goal for water and sanitation?
Thank you, Joanne. If I can be optimistic and say yes, we are. Let me first answer your question: how bad are we in this? And to answer this question, because SDG 6 is about access to water and sanitation, especially for the poor, for vulnerable, and for that we have to look at the water security in its entirety. As Hyun said, you can't take one segment of it and say, let us just look at that. And it's similar with water security. Water cuts across all sectors, all teams, is needed by everybody, not just for the water access. So at ADB, we have been quite methodic, in fact, in tracking the progress of our member countries in Asia and the Pacific region in their water security. We use 5 key dimensions. We have been doing this exercise with some of our partners since 2007, and we have been improving it with different methodologies. So this tracking exercise of water security remains consistent, and the data we look at it for each country at a country level also remains consistent. So We define water security is the availability of adequate water to ensure safe and affordable water supply, inclusive sanitation, but also for improved livelihoods, healthy ecosystems, and reduce water-related disasters. So we look at all 5 key dimensions of water: the rural household security, urban, environmental, economic, and disaster-related. And we have, as we track, of course, we don't look great. In our region, most of our countries in this aggregated water security parameter fall below the average. So if it's in the scale of 1 to 5, 5 is the most water secure or model country. None of our countries are in the model state in our region. A lot of them are at 4 out of 5. Very few are at 4, and these are the advanced economies like New Zealand and Australia. Few have made progress and gone from 2 to 3, which is still very good progress. As you say, I'm a very optimistic person that way. But a lot of them remain at 2, which is engaged state or just developing water security. And a few still remain at 1, which is nascent, or you really have a lot to do. So here, and also we look at the availability of water, Joanne. The total, on average in Asia, we spend about 81% of our water resources for agriculture. 10% is for industrial use. This is on average. Some countries like China, it may be 70% for agriculture. And some countries like India, it's 90% for agriculture. But on average, 80% to 81% for water for agriculture, 10% for industrial or commercial use, and only 9%, Joanne, is for our drinking purposes, municipal or rural drinking purposes. So when you look at this very tiny, tiny availability of water to begin with, you can see how water stressed we are in our region. And of this 9% water available for drinking or hand washing, that is sent to us, the piped water supply, which again is basic for having access to wash your hands, is less than 30% on average. And of course, we've been progressing, but we have a long way to go. And if you look at the rest of the key economic indicators or other indicators, the water governance is not there to ensure that the vulnerable, for instance, low-income communities who are the most impacted, don't have access because our governance structure don't allow that. We think they don't have land tenure. So many of our member countries may be struggling to provide piped water connections to them. So the governance structures are missing. The structures to cross-subsidize for utilities to provide these services for hand washing are missing. I won't, go into numbers, otherwise I'll be talking here for very long. But the water governance, the water structures, the capacity of utilities to recover their cost. And we also did in middle of 2020, Joanne, a survey of our water utility partners in the ones who have been working with ADB, and that includes water and sanitation service providers, irrigation, water resources service providers, and a lot of mixed kit of private sector, fully government-owned entities, semi-government-owned entities, and all of them showed that the ability to provide to the vulnerable, if we have tackled the governance, to already have the wash facilities to low-income areas, they did best. They fared best with the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, we have a long way to go. As I said, on average, we are less than middle. We are at an engaged state. We still have a lot to go across all key dimensions of water security. And unless we tackle that and shift the inefficiencies, for instance, just lastly, the irrigation sector that is taking more than 80% of our water is highly inefficient. We lose even 70% of that. It doesn't even bring the productivity of crops that we need to grow more food. So we need to provide more water for wash, for different facilities, for drinking. And also COVID-19 pandemic showed us that you can't allocate water for hand washing freely when you don't have, you have to ration it with the very little amount that you receive. So we need to free up from inefficiencies in agriculture to bring it to the municipal or the rural drinking water uses. So that is the whole picture of, to tackle A, you must tackle B, C, D, E of water security. And across all of the B, C, E, D, we have a fair way to go. I'll stop here. I can answer more during the Q&A in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neeta. And I'm really pleased that you're optimistic about water. And can I just ask you briefly, are you as optimistic about sanitation?
I am. We have actually, when you compare the two, we have progressed a lot. And thanks to some of our key clients like India, who have gone on a very high level mission called Swachh Bharat mission, led by the Prime Minister of India, and across all states in India, and many countries are doing that. So we are steadily progressing. But again, our baseline is extremely low. We have, 1.5 billion people still defecating in open. So when you look at that baseline, we have a fair way to go. But when we look at where we were even in 2019 or 2018 to where we are now, and as I said, we track these very regularly. Our tracking mechanisms are closely tied to the SDG targets. We have made a significant progress in sanitation too. Yeah, so I'm optimistic, Joanne.
Thank you very much, Neeta, and we'll be coming back to you later. So let me turn to Naheed Sarabi. Naheed, it's so good to see you, and it's great to have you on our panel. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Naheed, you have played a leading role in the government of Afghanistan as the Deputy Minister of Finance, and you are now at UNDP. So you have this unique perspective of having worked on the government side and also working on the donor side. So you understand both sides. And a recent UN report finds that the effects of the pandemic have devastated the most vulnerable and left them further behind. And that must be also true for countries affected by fragility and conflict like Afghanistan. Naheed, I wonder if you could describe for us what's happening on the ground in fragile countries, how the pandemic has affected development progress and also affected progress towards the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's such a pleasure to be with this panel. So happy. So let me give a little bit background of the SDG progress in Afghanistan. And I'm so sorry, but I'll have to draw my firsthand experience and lessons learned from Afghanistan as I work in this country and have known it better. So in 2019, the progress against SDGs were already slow, as mentioned before. Afghanistan as a country already was slow and had already achieved 38% of the targets against the progress against the SDGs, which ranked at 139 out of 166 countries that were assessed for SDGs. The pandemic also impacted negatively the progress on the SDGs. As an example of in the conflict country, Afghanistan is facing multiple challenges, and we should recognize that apart from the pandemic, there is insecurity with no certain prospect for peace, challenges of drought, which impacted Afghanistan in 2019 very heavily. The economy faced a setback, and also the challenges of the returnees, refugees, but also the internally displaced people from the conflict and drought and impacts the environment. UNDP released a series of notes and reports in 2020 and 2021, which predicted that the impact of pandemic will be really negative on the economy. Afghanistan faced a troop withdrawal in 2014, where the economy already faced a setback, but then it recovered itself and averaged about 2.3% 3% of economic growth. But once the pandemic hit the country, the economy contracted by 5%. And it is estimated that, our estimates show at least, that for the real gross domestic product to recover itself to its pre-pandemic level, it might require at least 2 years. And this impact would be really long lasting. The services were impacted, mainly services where women were present. Industries were impacted. The delivery of services, of course, but most important, and I think this might be true for all the post-conflict countries, is that the countries who are facing already lack of resources, they have to reprioritize and realign their resources to the new realities of the pandemic, which slowed down the ongoing development activities, impacting the progress against SDGs. Just an example of what the two important SDGs that were highly impacted is SDG 1, poverty, and the health, access to health. As I said before, although the growth picked up after 2014, averaging 2.3%, but the population growth was around 2.5%, which caused a decline in per capita income that pushed the poverty level to 47%. And as the latest survey shows, the household survey of 2019 and 2020, against the 38% poverty rate in 2012. Although in the later months of 2020, there was estimates that the poverty rate might even grow up to 70% given the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic. Let us also consider that this disparity in income may not be something that would recover in the next coming years, and the impacts will be long lasting. As a result of conflict, as a result of environmental impacts, nearly 18 million Afghans, which is half of the population almost, will be needing humanitarian assistance in 2021 and going forward. Coming to the health sector, which was already a very vulnerable sector with weak institutions, under-resourced. Again, it faced repurposing of resources from prevention and control of communicable diseases like tuberculosis and polio. Only last year, Afghanistan saw new cases of polio, which could have been prevented in case the resources, both human capital, but also financial resources, were available to tackle these challenges. Studies shows that 9 out of 10 people, but 8 out of 10 people, sorry, but 9 out of 10 children will face some form of deprivation, which means that children will be more susceptible and vulnerable to the effects of pandemic and poverty. Women too are another segment of society will be more vulnerable to the pandemic, especially women businesses, as we have done our studies, and UNDP is facilitating support to women SMEs to pick up from the effects of the pandemic, because mainly women were engaged more in the production side of the economy rather than export and import, which was more male-dominated activity in Afghanistan. So overall, the effects of the pandemic for a post-conflict, I would say in the middle of a conflict country, has been huge. There have been negative impacts, although there is high level of commitment from the government to avoid the negative consequences and for the economy to pick up again. But I'm afraid government and all of us who are working in the development sector in Afghanistan will have to see trade-offs between poverty reduction and more sort of long-term development objectives to avoid negative consequences, more negative consequences in the coming months and years. I'll stop here. I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Naheed, thank you very much indeed. And we go from an optimistic view to one that where we're all trying to stay optimistic about the future of Afghanistan. And I feel that this is a time when a country is at its most vulnerable, that is when more support should be available. Are you seeing that development partners are staying in Afghanistan, are supporting the government and staying with you, or is there a concern that development assistance might also fall within the coming years?
Well, development assistance has declined since its peak that was in 2010 and 2011, almost to 46%. Although the development community and donors were very generous at the Geneva conference last year for Afghanistan, where they pledged around $13 billion, but $3.3 billion only for 2021. But that is highly conditional on peace and reforms by the government. If government is supported to address those reforms and implement it, and if there is progress on peace, I'm optimistic that all of us can grab this opportunity and go ahead. But there is, I would say, a cautious optimism that there has to be, that reforms have to be implemented, and that there has to be consensus around peace, both regionally and globally. And the traditional way of doing business may not be helpful. We'll have to look into alternative sources of financing for Afghanistan. We'll have to look into alternative partnerships rather than give and take in Afghanistan remaining a highly dependent donor country.
Okay, we're gonna come back to that as well in the second round. So thank you very much, Naheed. Let me now turn to Karen Murray, who is the Alternative Executive Director on ADB's Board of Directors. So Karen, I'm coming to you last, and you've heard the various perspectives that have already been given to us by the other panelists. And just as a board member, how do you see the situation in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thanks very much, Joanne. And I would also like to say it's a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm someone who always complains when there's a lack of gender diversity on panels that ADB hosts, but it's actually quite a pleasure to be part of an all-female panel, so thanks for having me. So I would say in relation to the SDGs, undoubtedly there's been a major setback across a broad range of areas. And I think we all had a sense that while progress was slow and we were clearly off track for the SDGs even before the pandemic, that there was always movement in the right direction, and particularly when it came to pulling people out of poverty. But I think the pandemic's really shown just how fragile those gains have been in reality, and just how quickly things can reverse. ADB estimated, I think towards the end of last year, that COVID was going to drag 78 million people back into extreme poverty and 162 million people back under the $3.20 a day poverty line. And as you sort of frequently hear people saying, it really has laid bare the underlying structural inequalities and the scale of the development challenges and the weaknesses in our societies. So what I've seen from the perspective of an ADB board member over the last 15 months, I think for me has been quite inspiring. But if I'm really honest, it's also been kind of depressing at times as well. So I think the scale of the response and the types of measures that were taken by our developing member countries to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, protect the health and economic and social well-being of their people has really been quite incredible. And ADB has had the privilege of influencing but also supporting financially many of those packages, and particularly through the COVID pandemic response option, or CPRO as for an acronym, modality that was brought in to respond to the pandemic. But I think it's really easy to forget just how uncertain things were if you look back to February last year, and it's sort of just easy to forget what that felt like and how unthinkable some of the measures that have been taken since then actually were at that time. So what we saw was that under this really immense uncertainty and pressure, even in very, very low resource environments, the poorest countries. Governments were pulling together response packages that really did attempt to protect poor and vulnerable people. And this was never going to be enough to fully mitigate the impacts of COVID, especially given the scale of the crisis that we've seen unfold. So countries really were very quickly building on existing mechanisms and sort of transmission channels, but they very often had to stand up social protection, economic support, health measures from complete scratch. And at times when people were not able to work together, you weren't able to do things in person, you didn't have the digital systems, we had social distancing, lockdown measures. So I think for me that was a really incredible to see what was pulled together. And from an evaluation perspective, given that's the topic of this week, I think we need more time, and there'll need to be more detailed analysis to see just how successful those responses have been. But I think ADB has done some excellent work in putting together this policy database that will track the responses of members and allow us to really look back in a year or two's time and just see what has actually worked and what we can learn from it. And I'd also just really like to acknowledge and recognise the really hard work of ADB staff in supporting all of those DMC efforts when they themselves were working under really, really challenging circumstances. And I say it was kind of depressing at times because the opportunity cost of this financing is really significant. We're already underinvesting across all of the areas that are covered by the SDGs. The scale of the challenge is even greater, and governments are even more fiscally constrained. But I would, just this idea of not locking down the SDGs, I would challenge the idea that the pandemic response should be considered as being separate to delivering on the SDGs. I think this creates a bit of a false dichotomy. Many of the things that governments were doing to respond to the pandemic are still critical to the SDGs. And even if that means just stopping us going backwards on some of the SDG targets or avoiding permanent scarring. So for example, measures that help keep girls in school, absolutely critical to medium to long-term global development, and getting kids back into school urgently should really be a priority for everybody. But what I found hard was to see governments borrowing billions of dollars, particularly to buy vaccines that might need to be boosted annually. It might not just be a one-off shot as well. And while the development of vaccines in this really unprecedented record time should be looked at as a huge achievement, I think this is one area where the money could have been much better spent elsewhere, or at least not to have been borrowed. And I think it's a really clear example of where prevention would have been better than the cure. And there's a lot to learn there about how to improve international cooperation for the future. When we're looking at the support package for Afghanistan in particular, I really had this strong feeling that there must be, I think it was $50 million of a grant that ADB provided. There must be so many better things that Afghanistan could do with this money than having to invest in these vaccines. So I'm not questioning that we should be rolling out the vaccines. It's just I wish we were doing something else with the money. Listening to Naheed talk there about some of the challenges in Afghanistan, including still having to deal with polio. I think there's so much more that we could have done with that money. So for me, the really important thing is that we don't waste this crisis, and we use it as a way to accelerate achievement of the SDGs. So I think we need to really ensure that there can be a silver lining out of all of this. So I think now at least issues of inequality, including gender equality, have been much more visible through this crisis. And I think people are really sort of questioning what's important in society, what gives meaning to their lives, recognition of the need for resilient and well-funded public services, and safety nets. I think all of that is much more highly valued. And we're seeing that across developing and advanced economies. These are issues in all societies. We've also learned that in a really, really hard way, just how high the cost of inaction is for preparing for crises when we haven't built that resilience up front. And that, the reality is that we will just bear these costs when it comes to it. And we're talking tens of trillions of dollars as a result of COVID. And we've also seen, the implications of lack of resilience in a whole range of areas. So I mentioned pandemic preparedness, the strength of health systems, and even our supply chains. And what we've also learned, I think, and particularly the richest countries and the richest groups in societies, that maybe wasn't fully appreciated before, is just how interconnected we all are, and that we really are only as strong as our weakest link. So, you know, one of the kind of key mantras at the moment around vaccines is no one is safe until all are safe. And I think just that sense of interconnectedness is something it would be really great to take forward. Because 2 years ago, you know, we had the SDG framework, but we weren't talking seriously enough about how to address some of these issues around, you know, inequality, supporting the most vulnerable, the burden of care on women, gender-based violence, the need for universal healthcare, the global taxation system, the role of biodiversity, taking serious climate action. And, you know, if you think about gender equality on many of the fronts and measures of gender equality, it's going to take more than a century on the prior kind of trajectory that we were on. But I feel like now we're talking about these issues more across all countries, developed and developing. So I'm really hoping that the SDG agenda can actually feel like it's more relevant for all countries than maybe it did in the past. I saw there was a question that came in about domestic resource mobilization and that, you know, is that going to be something, you know, that should be elevated? So I might just make a couple of points on that. I do think DRM and international tax cooperation are going to be really critical because we've seen debt levels elevated now to potentially unsustainable levels. And, you know, that funding for high quality public services is going to be really essential for addressing some of the drivers of inequality. So modernizing tax and social protection systems and just making them kind of more fit for purpose and, you know, matching the reality of the structure of the global economy in the 21st century and addressing the kind of challenges we have is going to be really key. I'm quite excited in a nerdy way about the potential for the global minimum corporate tax rate that's been championed by President Biden at the moment, and seeing that as a sort of stopping us race to the bottom. And, you know, there's a lot more momentum around global cooperation on digital taxation, carbon taxes, carbon pricing. And in the context of ADB, I think the really strong leadership and advocacy from President Massa means that we've actually got something really good to offer in this space. And the timing's right. This is really important. So I guess overall, I really hope that this is a bit of an inflection point for the global community and that it actually sets us on a better path to achieving the SDGs by 2030. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. And I think what you just did there was that you really, well, a number of things for me. What a massive agenda this is, and it's an agenda that every country faces. And it's one thing I've always respected about the SDGs is it's not an agenda just for developing countries. It's an agenda for all of us. So we're only as strong as the weakest link. So we all have to make progress against the SDGs. I was going to ask you whether you've seen a change in the types of initiatives that ADB is supporting, but we can come back to that later. I feel like time is going by so quickly, and what I'd like to do now is just give an opportunity to the audience. Maybe we could take about 4 or 5 questions. You can write questions in the Q&A box, or if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself, and please make your questions as brief as possible. They can be directed at one panelist or to all. But let's make about 10 minutes or so available for questions from the floor. So I'm going to open it up, and perhaps the best thing to do is to raise your hands. Do we have any questions? So there is a question popping up in the chat box, which talks about the localization of SDGs. And I think this is about country ownership and how deep country ownership has to go. So it can't just be ownership at the national level, but it also needs to be at the subnational level, and what can be done to support this. Maybe I could turn this question over to Hyun to start with. Have you seen much support for local government's involvement in the SDGs, Hyun, in your evaluation? You need to, Hyun, if you want to provide an answer, you need to unmute.
Sorry,
It's okay.
my mouse is not working, so.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can.
Just a question on the localization of the SDGs. What did we say about that in the evaluation?
Computer is a bit. Can you go to, could you go to other panelists and then come back? I have some problem with my computer at the moment.
Okay, no worries.
Joanne, I don't mind making a quick comment on this one. Yeah, I guess when I think about localization of the SDGs, it does, I always kind of think about it most in the context of NGOs and the role of NGOs and international NGOs. And, you know, one of the things that I would really like to see, I think localization is critical. And one of the things I would really like to see is, you know, just kind of giving greater voice to local NGOs or civil society generally, and less involvement and in a way sort of oversight over from international organizations that, you know, often act as sort of middlemen organizations in terms of, you know, the development partners are really guilty of expecting them to go in and provide this sort of oversight and accountability and reporting and things like that. And I just think it cuts out the people that really understand the context and know how to affect change. So, you know, I think there's a lot that development partners need to do differently to make sure that we can give effect to the localization agenda. Thanks.
Hyun.
May I also add a line here?
Yes, Neeta, please.
Yeah, thank you. So what we also see is, just as Karen said about the local you know, NGOs or civil society, the local governance, the lowest rung of the governance bodies, and the municipalities. So for us, this is an opportunity not to miss. COVID has shown the opportunities to decentralize power. So, and this can be, and where we saw, we did this extensive surveys of our utilities and partners, where we saw it work the best or the most resilient way or the fastest responses were where local bodies had the resources to do so. So this is an opportunity not to be missed, to provide those human resources, the capacity, the financing, and the actual power transfer to the local bodies is where we can really cut it and reach SDG targets sooner out, in my view.
I'm back. Now it's working.
Hyun, do you want to add anything to what's been said?
Yeah, I think they said all relevant things. Localization of the SDGs is needed to promote ownership at the domestic and local levels, according to our report, evaluation report. For instance, ADB has worked with the local governments and other stakeholders in East Java to define, implement, and monitor local strategies and to make data from districts available and accessible in a visually attractive and easy to understand way for different local stakeholders, thereby contributing to localizing SDGs. So the key thing is to tailor the SDGs to both the national and subnational context and identifying the corresponding SDG implementation and monitoring strategies. Thanks.
Thank you, Hyun. So very quickly, we're just going to do a couple more questions, which I have in the chat box, and then we're going to move on to round two. So a question from Phil Rose is, do the panelists think ADB should move more aggressively into the social sectors to help with progress on the SDGs? Perhaps I can go to Naheed. Naheed, do you think that development partners should move more aggressively into the social sectors in Afghanistan, for instance?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's why I mentioned it briefly in the first round, that there has to be few trade-offs between those sectors that will bring revenues and economic growth versus the sectors that is more towards like social protection. In the recent report that even UNDP published, we talked quite about the social protection sector. And how to keep people out of the poverty, below the poverty line, and provide them even universal basic income. And there has to be an assessment of how the results of the development in the past 20 years kind of like increase the poverty level, although there are reasons behind it, as I mentioned before, instead of keeping people out of poverty. Social security, strengthening systems within the government that can take care of its people, for example, cash transfers, cash for work, or even child benefits, old age benefit. These are some of the areas that we might have to take a look at and see that in the coming years, it might be a way of alternative way of doing development. Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, I'm becoming very aware of the time. Just a question from the floor from Dirk Hoffman on the fact that evaluating SDGs is very complex, and that more complex than a standard evaluation. And do we think that the capacity of evaluators is sufficient? Are there enough evaluators with SDG capacities around? As evaluators, we would like to see the capacity of evaluation departments built and expanded. So I would say that, it's always going to be good to develop our capacity in this area. So yes, let's continue to build it. But thank you very much for your questions. Let's move on to round two. Round two is moving from the what to the how. Panelists, we're really running out of time, so I suggest that if you can, please keep your answers as short as possible. So Hyun, clearly the focus needs to be on tackling the pandemic. But what do MDBs like ADB need to do so that while responding to the crisis, SDGs are not left behind or locked down or put on a back burner? Does the evaluation have any pointers or any recommendations, say on SDG financing, partnerships and so on? What is it that MDBs are going to do moving forward to tackle the pandemic and to make sure the SDGs are given enough attention? Thanks, Hyun.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of our recommendations in our report is ramping up partnerships with other MDBs and UN agencies. Number one, to support their better mobilization of financing, and number two, to improve data collection and management on SDGs. So that's one of the key recommendations we have put forward in the report. On SDG financing, this has become a very important issue because of the pandemic. With the pandemic widening SDG financing gaps, both the public and private financing needs to be mobilized to ensure SDG achievement. On the private financing side, ADB and other MDBs are tapping capital markets to help finance SDGs using thematic bonds. On the public front, ADB is set to launch, already launched, a regional hub or platform, if you like, on domestic resource mobilization and international tax cooperation in Asia and the Pacific in 2021. So the role of domestic resource mobilization will be very crucial in financing SDGs, especially as the pandemic imposes fiscal constraints to donor countries. When it comes to domestic resource mobilization, taxation and fiscal policies are important tools. So tax system has to be progressive, not only direct taxes, but also indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are regressive in nature. So for the government to implement more equitable tax system, especially indirect taxes, they have to know the consumption patterns of people, which items the government can exempt, which ones not. So it has more equitable impact. So implementing a progressive tax system is one of the key issues, and also strengthening administration of revenue agencies within countries may help increase domestic revenues. And fiscal policies can be targeted to promote certain development objectives like gender equality by providing fiscal incentives like subsidies, tax credits, or other things to sectors that hire more women in small companies or enterprises. So fiscal policies can also promote environmental sustainability through tax incentives to renewable energy firms. And then that's one side.
I wonder if I can stop you there because I'm conscious of time. We may be able to come back and cover more.
Sure.
But you covered a number of things there, ramping up partnerships and so on. I want to turn to Neeta. Neeta, you know, you're on the ground. So can ADB really address SDGs and the crisis together? Do the two go hand in hand in your view?
Joanne, as I said, you called me optimistic. I am. When I look at my pipeline for water sector, the answer is yes. Our pipeline, what we committed through loans and grants in water sector in 2020 was 2.4 billion. Our pipeline in 2021 is 4.3 billion. And in 2022 is 4.7 billion. And it's rising. So I don't see governments shying away, maybe because we are in a sweet spot and COVID has highlighted the need of better water and sanitation security, and we don't see them shying away. But the reality is, yes, there will be fiscal crunch, and we are seeing that. We are seeing a lot of our water sector clients, or many infrastructure clients, local bodies who are relying on government transfers for their sustenance. The transfers are drying out. A lot of our private sector clients, small and medium enterprises who are sanitation, water service providers, their bank loans, they cannot service anymore. So there is an opportunity for us to do things differently. I liked what some of the other panelists said. Do not waste this opportunity. And we are already talking about new normal. So in all our infrastructure sectors, we are going to take this as an opportunity to take it on a more resilient, more low carbon pathway, and also caching it to say, what are the new areas this has opened up? Hyun also said, you know, what are the fiscal tools that we're going to give, which will tackle governance reforms, at the same time ensure continuity of the cash flow. Cash flow is needed, we can't deny that. Our clients desperately need money to reboot the economy. But can we at the same time tag along policy reforms that were really lagging for a long time. Can we use this opportunity? Here is your PBL that you desperately need, your treasury support, but we will only give it to the municipalities that are going to make it gender friendly, that are going to make water supply and informal settlements easy by tackling all the governance reforms, that are going to look at your water governance reforms that have been pushed back for political gains for years. Let's use this opportunity to combine the two. And you gave me very little time. I can carry on, but you can ask me again.
Yeah, no, it's good in this round that we're brief, but I think what you're saying is that moving forward, we need a more holistic approach, one that connects all the dots. So it's not just the technical side of infrastructure development, but the link to governance, the link to gender, that we make these stronger links. And Hyun was referring to that too. So let me go again to Naheed. Naheed, I mean, no one agency can provide all the support that's needed in a fragile situation to help a country get back onto the path to achieving the SDGs. How do you think donors should work together? Are they even capable of working together? And can they work together in coherent partnerships to do things differently? I mean, especially in a country like Afghanistan, how would you ideally like to see development partners working to achieve the SDGs?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, Joanne, and I will be very brief. We call it an UNDP SDG platform approach, where UNDP, usually its mandate is to, as an integrator of SDGs and trying to provide that platform for all development partners and other UN sister agencies and government to make use of the tools as how to achieve these SDGs. As you rightly mentioned, it's not the job of one agency, but I should underline and underscore it that government ownership is very, very important here. Even when it comes to donor partnerships and having everyone to work along the same line and as per the priorities of government should be very clear on what are those priorities and even prioritize SDGs that need to be achieved and what sequence. That sequence is very important. There are three things that government can lead, and starting from SDG integration to its plans and budget that will provide a coherent picture to all development partners and donor agencies that these are the priorities at the national and subnational level that can be achieved. Second, obviously, we talk about SDG financing. The traditional way doesn't work. We'll have to look into different modalities, and even the traditional donors who have been handing in funds and aid to Afghanistan, they need to look into more partnership in terms of trade, public-private partnership, supporting the private sector to pick up and take the burden of the traditional grants and aid. And obviously the results and monitoring and evaluation of SDGs for us to know at the end of the day what has to be achieved. This is very important for government to give direction to all its partners to avoid redundancies and to not do duplication. Sectoral prioritization is very important, as which donor picks what sector and what are the niche and characteristics and the comparative advantage of each donor agency and IFIs too. So just to be brief, let's help donors, government, and strengthen the institutions from which it can guide everyone to achieve SDGs.
Do you think that it requires also stronger leadership from government of the donor partners? Do you find that enough leadership is being taken in fragile states, or are they even able to take leadership of the donor community?
I think donors, the uncertain situation, as I said, the conflict and insecurity, and it kind of puts or derails even development partners at one point, and they're trying to pick up between the priorities and what comes as an urgent when what's really important. And sometimes the urgent matters are unfortunately being taken as are more focused on, despite the realities. We know there are things that are important in the long run for the country, and driven by agendas or cherry picking few areas and reforms which may not have a broader impact in the country. There is interest. I see that the international community has shown their interest and support for long-term development in Afghanistan, and I think everyone sees the impact of a stable and secure Afghanistan. But security situation and the uncertainty for peace has derailed and kind of, I would say, confused our agendas a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Naheed. Thank you very much. And finally, Karen, if I could come back to you. We've heard the other panelists speak on the way forward, and there's been some suggestions on the how. But as a board member, how would you like to see ADB work to ensure that while responding to the crisis, the SDGs are not locked down? You've already spoken a little bit about this, but if you'd like to add a little bit more, that would be good. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And like I said, I sort of see a bit of a false dichotomy of separating them. I think we need to sort of think about it as being a bit of a paradigm shift. So I fully support the vision, the goals of our strategy, ADB strategy 2030. But I think we need to think about adapting how we get there, particularly in the short to medium term, and how much risk we're prepared to take in that. So a couple of areas that I'd like to see ADB focus on. I don't think we're out of the response phase completely yet. I guess the impact of the pandemic on countries is quite different, and we're seeing that divergence. And some countries that were doing really well are actually now starting to get into huge difficulties and wide-scale community transmission for the first time in some cases. So I think we're going to need to remain flexible and provide tailored responses. And I don't think that we should rule out any further crisis response support at this stage. Again, I think it's going to be critical to ensuring that we can achieve the SDGs. I agree with Neeta on greater support for policy reforms and the use of PBLs. There is quite strong appetite within developing countries for major reforms, and reforms that maybe would have been unthinkable maybe a year ago. So I do think that we should take that opportunity. And Phil's question about deepening social sector engagement, I think an important way to do that is through the PBL modality. And ADB can improve how it does that, but I think it's important. And as Naheed said already, we need to support governments to build those right systems, particularly social protection systems. A greater focus on climate mitigation and adaptation, I think, is going to be absolutely critical. When I look at how much ADB members have spent on, or at least announced in terms of policy responses to the pandemic, it was over $30 trillion, and 3.7 trillion of that was from developing members. And then, I contrast that with the commitment under the Paris Agreement to provide 100 billion, which seems like a large amount, but a tiny amount compared to those trillions. And that was committed in 2015 under the Paris Agreement to support developing countries, and we still haven't even hit that yet. So I do think we're going to need to make more financing available. We need to be mindful of financial sustainability pressures, but I think we really need to invest in climate action now and building climate resilience as well as mitigation. So we know that our members are going to, despite debt sustainability issues, they will borrow more for their recovery. So let's make that additional financing available for genuinely green investments, and try and incentivize them to make those investments, because it is to the benefit of everyone. This is a global public good. And then just one other area to highlight, I think, as a cross MDB issue, is around thinking about how we can stretch our balance sheets. This has been a work in progress for a number of years. The G20 made recommendations back in 2018, and there have been some developments around things like sovereign exposure exchanges. But I do think we're going to need to look at how we can stretch and rethink our capital adequacy frameworks a little bit. And I thought about this, prior to the pandemic, and it's not kind of ideal to do it in the midst of a crisis. But I do think we're going to need to look at the system as a whole about, what is the appropriate approach to capital adequacy given the special nature of the multilateral development banks, because we are going to need to provide more finance and to stretch our balance sheets and also to mobilize the resources of others. So I'd like to see, some more momentum across all of the MDBs on that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for your comments, your views. Very good. We do have time to go back to the floor to take some more questions, and I see that in the chat box there are many. Please have patience with me so I can go through these and feed them to you. Hyun, I think there's one. Well, no, this is directed at everybody, but it's and I hope I've got the question right. But it's about, the urgency, in a way, the kind of speed at which the world has responded to COVID-19, come together to finance vaccines and come together with this great collaborative approach. Is that the approach that we also need for the SDGs once this crisis is over? And how would we do that? Karen, maybe could you start?
Sure, I would start by saying I think we need to learn how we could do the vaccines a lot better before we say this is how we would apply it to implementing the SDGs. So some aspects of it on the vaccine development were absolutely fantastic, great collaborative effort, very incentivized by the money available and the market power that the vaccine companies have, but we need to sort out the international cooperation and how we could do this better. So I'd like us to just start by reflecting a little bit more on how we can improve international cooperation first. Thanks.
Okay, does anybody have anything else to add? If not, I will move on to another question, and it's about the localization of SDGs and the use of NGOs. And I think there's a view that, if governments don't invite NGO participation, then it's not going to work. Hyun, what did our evaluations say about the engagement of civil society in the achievement of the SDGs?
On NGOs involvement, we did interview some selected NGOs involved in ADB projects, and we found that they know the conditions on the ground very well. And when it comes to SDGs, I mean, they have to be interpreted in very country-specific, local-specific context. So this involving the NGOs is quite important to facilitate the way development aids are reaching on the ground. And also we found that ADB is working with private foundations to help support SDGs. And we also found the urban sector group is working with civil society organization, Rockefeller Foundation, to support climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. So just some specific examples.
Thank you.
Joanne, can I add a line here?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Neeta.
Yes, we also in the water sector, we see a very strong role for civil societies, not just NGOs, the water users committees, the community-based organizations, the Anganwadis. So also, and during the pandemic, we saw how quickly they mobilized, how quickly they were able to provide relief. For instance, when governments are looking at the vaccines, making sure that the food supplies are there for the vulnerable, making sure that the water temporarily are there for the vulnerable, were really done very well. But I think there is a role we could look at supporting the accountabilities within the civil societies, governance structures that they have, and trying to bring them, rather than, I think in many of our DMCs or our member countries, they're really seen at being peripheral. So bringing them into the mainstream to say, let's bring you into this ambit of mainstream, let's work with your accountability and governance mechanisms, and really accept that as part of a pillar that is needed. I think that's missing in many of our developing member countries, and ADB can play a very big role in that.
Thank you, Neeta. Also, Naheed, I know you have something to say. I was wondering to what extent civil society plays an active role in Afghanistan or elsewhere as you've seen it.
Absolutely. I think civil society, even during the years of conflict, and have been great champions of service delivery in Afghanistan, especially in areas where, due to insecurity, government could not have an outreach. And civil society, non-government organizations, they have had to play a big role in service delivery. But one thing on the SDGs, I think we'll have to be a little bit flexible in explaining SDGs to different audiences. For local people, for authorities, as well as for local NGOs, it's really important to describe what SDGs really mean for them practically on the ground. What change in life will it bring? And that's when you get more support and mobilize support, not only in implementation, but also helping people to achieve it in sort of derive different partnerships. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, we are in the last few minutes. What is the possibility of a green growth moving forward? I know I've summarized that question very briefly, but I think that covers it. Are we going to see a kind of green recovery after the pandemic? Neeta?
Well, yeah, you have asked the most optimistic person here, so I would say we will see a good inertia going forward, and we as MDBs have to keep that momentum, inertia fueled up. So I think there is, as Karen and others said, there is an appetite for taking the reforms that had been staggering and stagnant for many years, and we need to catch that, and that is what is going to take us on the green recovery, and keep fueling that, keep looking at, what Naheed said. I really like it. Business as usual is not going to cut it anymore. We have seen it. Next pandemic, next few variants will completely derail us. So we have no other way but to do things differently, and keep looking at how do we fuel that inertia and desire and need and fiscal space to do it differently is the role of MDBs, and I hope we can do that.
Would anybody else like to contribute? Hyun, is a green growth possible moving forward?
I'm just struggling to monitor all this. There is impetus, to be short, there is impetus for green recovery, but green and inclusive growth can be only achieved through, I think, the SDGs. So I think it is SDGs, as I alluded much earlier, although we are facing a health crisis like this, SDGs still remain the best framework for promoting economic recovery from the pandemic, and also achieving towards the green growth or resilience and sustainability.
I would just add that I I like to think of myself as an optimistic person as well, but I think Neeta's trumping me on this today. I sort of wax and wane on whether to be optimistic or not. I'm feeling in a more optimistic space at the moment, but I just think the proof will be in these kind of once in a generational investments that governments are making over the next year or two as part of the recovery. All of the language is there. Everyone's talking about green investments, green recovery, but we'll see. I think COP26 this year is going to be really critical, and to see what actually gets put forward by countries in terms of updating their nationally determined contributions, putting in place long-term strategies. I think we'll start to see relatively soon just how serious those and how credible those transition plans are actually going to be. But I think in terms of some of the areas that ADB is working on this year, the energy policy, which we're looking at the moment, the draft of that, I hope that will be in place before COP26. And I think some of the directions in there are also quite positive. So like I said, I would like, if we are going to make much needed financing available, additional financing, then we need to really commit to it being very much green investments, and just kind of show people that it doesn't have to always be coming at a cost. There are genuinely some benefits, even if it's just reducing the longer term costs of not investing in climate action now, but just, I think continuing to strengthen the business case. Thanks.
Okay, everyone, I feel that we are coming to the end of our time, and I would just like to wrap up and say thank you to the wonderful panelists. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you, Karen, Naheed, Neeta, and Hyun. We all enjoyed reading the chapter in the AER on the SDGs. It was a very good report, and we're looking forward to doing further evaluations on progress against the SDGs. So I heard a number of things. I'm not going to try and sum it up, but I'm just going to go through some words. So I heard holistic approach, paradigm shift. I heard a lot about gender, localization of the SDGs. I heard the word optimistic being used a lot, which is good. Civil society and the need to engage civil society, green investment, domestic resource mobilization, clearly important moving forward, and donors working differently and working together. And working across the SDGs, not cherry picking. But I also heard the word uncertainty a lot, particularly in fragile states. And then also the fact that millions of people are going to be thrown back into poverty. So the challenges ahead are enormous. And I think it's very important that we continue to evaluate progress towards the SDGs so that we know what's working, what we need to do better, and we need to do more evaluation. But thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you to gLOCAL, and thank you to the audience for listening. And I think we're about to run out of time, and I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
I equally enjoyed it. And actually one of your colleagues wrote saying he feels more optimistic after this. That made my day. But yeah, the pudding is in, COP26 will show us whether we can remain optimistic, but let's hope so, huh?
Yeah, well, there's a lot coming up on the global agenda, right? COP26 brings all of these things together, and will be important for everyone.
Yeah.